Thank you very much. We take our time now for the next 50 minutes for a discussion on some of these aspects we heard today. And out of the circle of the participants of this discussion, Mr. Kranebittl, you're someone who can evaluate the digitization and its progress in Austria, in the private and in the public sector. How do you rate these developments at the moment?
From my point of view, very low, honestly talking. So if I follow the news, so I think there's no week where we saw something about there is Uber, this is something dangerous, this is something bad. I think we are talking about how can we kill Uber. Nobody's talking about how can we support Uber, because from my point of view, it's a very cool service. And I think in Austria, it's very similar to the IT organizations. And I think you also talked about these shifts and these two parties, these two views. So there is let me say, the old society of IT, which is the people 50 plus who are coming together, talking about the digital roadmap of Austria with the, I think, most important stuff, the broadband. This is digitalization in Austria. At the same time, we see 5,000 developers in Graz, 20 plus, talking about the sexy stuff in the digital world. So I think this is the problem in Austria, that the leading society is in the old age, and the new society is not seen. So I think there is no connection between them. And from the government, I had the experience that we will get some drivers now. I think we have to wait on that. So I am not really satisfied about the development here, because maybe we should vote for Helmut and Leo to act as a driver for the government and for the society to go more into digital, because from my point of view, it's really an opportunity for Austria to go into a digital lead in Europe.
So do you see the politics at the moment as a retard and as brakeman, or do they have often this ungrateful role of the one who has to have voice in such a phases of change?
I think this is exactly the problem of this change, that I think we in Austria, we are talking about the worries. So we are talking about the problems, we are talking about security, we are not, we do not want this change. But from my point of view, this change will come. What is this change is here. So I remember discussion with the former Minister of Economics, Mr. Mara, with a small circle of very important people out of the economy in Austria. And they talked about, could we really block this development? And Mara said something like, okay, we can close the doors, but the world around us will not notify that, so it will go ahead. So if we are on the brakes, okay, the Chinese will come and everybody. So I think this economy is coming, and while we are talking in Austria about digital taxes, because this is also a main part of the digital environment which is discussed in Austria, other companies come in and bring services like, for example, Uber. And I think this is also in my company, or for me, in my responsibility. Of course, I have to focus on security, on privacy. I have all this GDPR stuff to manage, but on the other side, I have to manage the innovation in the company. I think this is my responsibility, and I think I try to balance that. And honestly, I like to be more the innovator than the security guy, but I think you have to have the right organization for that. And maybe we should think about the organization in the Austrian society and the politics also in that way, to have people in place who are really more for the innovation, and of course another team who is more focused on regulation and security and this stuff.
So you
No, yeah. Sorry, but I think this is very similar. You see this picture everywhere. There is in Austria, there are CIOs who are talking about, this is my data center, I want to save this, I can't move an application into the cloud, or I can use an application out of the cloud because this is dangerous. And there are others, they are talking about, okay, my aim is that in 10 years or in 5 years, all my environment is in the cloud. I think this is how leaders should work. How I think we are here because we are leaders to create the future and not to avoid the future.
So you preferred talking about AI, for instance, and we're interested where you implemented this in your company, but we'll come to this topic later on in this discussion. I would like to stick to regulations and laws at the beginning, because you mentioned that now that this is a problem. We are very focused on this in Austria, and often we hear these sentences, there are global developments, Simon Weidler, and only local laws, and everybody does something different. And the question is, does this still fit together, and can politics in this connection still retain a creative primacy?
Well, I would strongly argue in favor that politics, and also with some of the initiatives in the context of the digital single market, we developed some very future-proof policies and regulations, such as the GDPR. Because looking at the GDPR now and its content, it's enshrining some ethic considerations and providing them in a tech-neutral way, so that also for the future generations, we can ensure that certain core pillars of our society are secured, also in view of this digital transformation, not only the economy and the businesses are undergoing, but also the society as such.
This is a general question overall, where wants the society to go? And I read in an interview, Susan, you gave, in which you said, I want a debate on what we want society to look like. If you give humanity complete health and complete leisure, how are you going to spend the second 50 years of your life? Playing golf? What do we want people to do? To be, we've never asked this before. Where can you see somebody who asks this question in our society, and who are the people giving answers at the moment to this question?
Well, at least you don't want me to give the answers. Yeah. Okay, so can you hear me? Yeah, just checking. Yeah. Okay, so what he's saying is something that I think we tend to forget. We all know what we don't want. We all know what we want to regulate. We want to eliminate. We want to prevent. So what? And those of you who have kids, this is a rhetorical question. What kind of people do you want your kids to be? What kind of skills do you want them to have? What kind of lives do you want them to have? Yeah? I presume you don't want them to join the Amish, you don't want them to throw their digital devices away, you don't want them to be glued in front of a screen. So with the skills that they're learning, and what kind of thinking, what kind of person, and I think no one has really come to that. And as you correctly said, the corollary of that is we, in our very privileged Western world, no longer have to worry about being hungry or cold or in pain, as sadly many parts of the world are. But those of us in our privileged life can anticipate living ever longer. And so I like this idea of the second 50 years of your life. What are you going to do with it? You know, I mean, I don't know how old everyone is. What's the average age here, roughly?
Average age, 30?
18? Everyone looks
About
18.
18, yeah.
Well, okay, so I'm assuming that everyone is still active, and so I'm sure you've got 50 years ahead of you, as long as you don't excessively drink or smoke or anything. So what are you going to do with that time? And sorry to be rude about golf, but really, of all the things to do with life, do you just want to do golf? You know, I mean, couldn't you want to do other things? Yeah. Well, so we've got this wonderful opportunity. You know, instead of just treading water and waiting to die and just avoiding things, you know, there's this wonderful opportunity to be what? So, in answer to your question, I think this is something we need to think about, because we haven't assumed we were able to until now, you know? And it has to, so I'll give you two examples where one can actually have people power. Yeah? One was, of course, with cigarettes, where for a long time you had companies where people were making money out of other people having fun, in inverted commas. Yeah? And it wasn't until awareness was raised that people themselves decided that they were going to change their lifestyles and so on. No one forced them to. The second, I think, I don't know how it is in Austria, but in the UK when I was growing up, every lady aspired to have a fur coat, usually a mink coat. Yeah? This was, I don't know if you wear fur here still, but in the UK now, if you were to go out in the street in a fur coat, you would be harangued and harassed and shouted at, and no one wears fur coats anymore. And it's not because there's a law against wearing fur coats. You can, but no one does. Why? Because awareness has been raised, there's been discussions, and so this long-winded answer is, I think that the more discussions we can have, the more we get power back, realize that we can make the decisions. The IT systems are services. They're there as a means to an end, not as an end in itself. Then we can start to have these discussions. But the hardest question of all is, what do you want your kids to be? What kind of life do you want? Do you just want to play golf? Or do you want to write novels or symphonies? Or what do you want to do? Because we have, at last, the scary opportunity that these things might be possible. Before, it was decided for us. But now, it's not decided for us. It's not a question of dying early or being born into the wrong stratum of society or not having opportunities. We have those things now. So how are we going to decide and do? I mean, I think it's an exciting time. It's scary, but exciting. But we have to wake up. We all have to wake up and start thinking about what we want and who we are and what we want our kids to be, because otherwise the worst will happen. Everyone will end up slaves, merely serving a machine and manipulated by clever people who know how to make your dopamine work.
And my question also was where do you see the people giving the answers what to do with our lives? Are these the company leaders who looking for new inventions?
Well, there's two possible candidates here, groups. Yeah, one would be politicians and one would be business or company. Yeah. Now let's take each in turn. I think it's unfair to expect business people to be the conscience of the nation. You know, I mean, if I was running a gaming company, and I'm making money and it's legal, that's a bit of a tough call to expect me to start to put the handbrake on and so on, and I suppose regulation will. But the other are politicians, and I do have some experience, you may or may not know that I'm in the House of Lords, hence the title. So I do witness people attempting with every good intention to create a fair and a good society. But all we can do is make laws not to do something. You can't legislate to do something, yeah? So you can prevent things like child pornography, and that's how I first got interested in this. There was a debate in the Lords on child pornography, and I spoke more generally about neuroscience and the digital impact and so on. But you can't legislate to do something. You can only legislate against things. And I think that politicians, they follow behind the trends. They can't create the trends. They serve society, as in a sense do companies. You know, so it's up to the society to create. And the other one I should have forgotten is the media, of course. You guys. Yeah. You're the other sector. Okay. But what you have to understand is that everyone has a different agenda. The media has a deadline that's usually, in my experience, about half an hour to do something, and then it's gone within a day. Whereas the politicians have 2 or 3 years, and then they want short-term things, so otherwise they won't be elected. And the companies merely want to stay in business, literally. So agendas are very different, and it's very hard to align those 3 things. And I think really society has to start waking up and asserting itself, myself.
Yes?
Maybe just to add on this, because very much from the regulator's perspective, of course, on the one hand you have to balance innovation and also safeguards, but you also must then look at society as such and see where you have to allocate accountabilities and responsibilities. So, as you said, media, where can we prohibit and legislate? Where can we incentivize to do things? When do we need to prohibit as such?
Well, I think this is where creativity comes in, and in the broadest sense, not in the sense that everyone can be a novelist and everyone can write symphonies, but everyone can be responsible for seeing the world in a different way, even if it's how you rearrange your kitchen, you know? That is fulfilling and interesting. And I think the media have a role in that they can help by having role models, they can be inspirational, they can promote these kinds of thoughts via soap operas, by fiction, if you like, by showing people that you don't have to just be told what to do all the time.
We have so many decisions to make. We have so many chances. But if we talk about what we expect from our lives, Katryna would like to refer to something we talked about yesterday. People also want to have a plannable life, and they want a planned life in a certain way. And there is digitization that could bring more predictability for our lives than the analog life we had before. But this promise, this is only a promise. It needs more flexibility from us than ever before. Why does this not go together?
I think, really, back to your point, I think part of it is a generational tension, yes? And I think if there was a way that we could take the wisdom and, say, some of the concerns and the experience and get in the same room with some of the amazing things that are happening with much younger people from a technology point of view, and find a way to understand the possibilities and graft that wisdom and experience together, that would be extraordinary. And that was really, something that I was hoping to try and convey in the talk, is that we aren't going to turn into Amish. I have problems at times with Uber as a company, but I haven't met an Uber driver that I didn't really enjoy or feel that this person was working hard and creating a great experience. And so I think, we have this tension right now, and these things are not going to go away. But what we've got to do is we've got to find a way for participation and this exchange between the old and the new to come together. That's one part of it. And then I think part of your question is really around temperament. I don't want to know what's going to happen next Wednesday. I love the serendipity of life. But I look at some of the people on our team, and one person in particular, and I know that he would love to know absolutely next Wednesday at 3 o'clock what was going to happen. And so if there was a service that could give that kind of insight without there being maybe a consequence to that, that is something that he might actually be very happy to partake in. And so I think part of this conversation is around choice and transparency and consequences, because we're all different. We all want different things. And we all want the same things. We all want to feel like we belong. We want to feel like we matter. We want to feel like the things we do add up to something. We want to be loved. We want to feel that the work that we do is valued. But we also want to create. We want to innovate. We want to break things. We want to move beyond boundaries. And the truth of it is that we are getting so smart that we can model out a lot of things. And then it comes back to your question. If we can model those things out, what do we want to do? Does it help to know when you typically might expire physically? And maybe it does, because it means that you would take a very different course of action around your health or your well-being. And so I think what lies at the heart of this question is we are different. And the first thing we've got to do is find a way of having this exploration in a way that doesn't cost us as a society. We have to find a way to be able to experiment with these things without really writing off possibilities to say that wasn't such a great idea. We can't get too far ahead without being able to integrate that in ways that work.
Because I said big data has the promise to know a lot of things before they happened, and you brought the example with the heart attack. I think you was it? Yeah. You were it 20 seconds before it takes place. What do you know? What do you know about?
Can I jump in there though? That's
yes.
Small data, and I think that's one of the powerful things. Is that's not big data, and this is the shift. Our little machine inside my body detecting my heart rate. That's tiny data. And I think that's one of the things that we need to be exploring, because tiny data in the context of you or I is this next forefront of possibility.
Yeah. No, just very quickly, it reminds me of what the Greeks used to talk about with determinism, and people might be familiar with that, which is how much is in your destiny and how much is not. And if you did know what was going to happen next Wednesday, surely you could change it if you didn't like it. So which means it's not going to happen next Wednesday after all. Or is it so, so I think it's quite, quite it's quite a complex and subtle question, and one that's been debated for centuries, which is how much Are things in our destiny determined, and how much, once you know something, could it be subverted?
Maybe just quickly to add on top what was just said.
I just wanted to ask you something, but just quickly. Yeah?
Just because I think here it's very much about choice in a human-centric digital world where you have the choice whether to make use of big data or small data or whatever you call it, that you're the person who say, I want this or I don't want this. And I think that's the core, and some legal instruments help to achieve this goal.
But then bear in mind, you think you want it, but someone's manipulating, you're at the screen and someone's telling you want it because you're being manipulated by these very clever psychologists designing the software.
And that's what I wanted to ask you. What do you want to know from your customers, or what do you even already know about their wishes before they come to your stores, or do not know at the moment, but you want to know it in the near future? Are there already things you know about these customers before they know that?
Yes, I think I will talk about that, but honestly, we are not using that in practice, but we are doing some let me say, some pilots on that. Of course, we can predict that you need a bottle of milk or some other stuff, like Helmut is talking about wine. So we see about your daily buyings, what is your behavior, and we can then pick out what will be the next order. So I think this is more or less a very simple big data exercise to really have this procedure to say, okay, from my point of view, okay, every day I drink 1 bottle of beer, so I'm buying a box of beer with 20 bottles, so I can then know, or we know that in 20 days it will come up of that. So we did an exercise in the company. I think you were part of this presentation where they walked through all the cash out data, and they found out that one special customer is buying 1 bottle of whiskey per week, and it was my. But all the audience, they thought this was only a test, but maybe it was realistic, because there are 2 men at home, so my son and me, and so of course, because this IT business is very hard, and so you need sometimes a kind of reset of your brain, you know, you know what I mean. But so I think this is really impossible. But what is now possible in the big data environment, especially because now we can do things we couldn't do in the past because technology was not available. So with cloud computing now there is infinity storage and power available for no costs. So I think today we are searching for questions we can answer. Yeah. In the past, we searched solutions for the requirements. So this is technology overtakes man, let me say. So there's more technology in place, or that ideas. That's why this digital innovation is so important.
Yeah, I've often thought that we're living in the old days. We lived in a question-rich, answer-poor world where you had to work very hard to find things out, and you had lots of questions. Now it's the opposite. We're living in an answer-rich, question-poor world where we're bombarded with facts and we don't even know what the questions would be to them. Yeah? So I think, so that is a problem, because bombarded, for example, watching YouTube, what are you trying to find out? What you're trying to do? Are you asking a question, or is it just a pastime? And if you don't have a question and a quest, and therefore a journey to make, you're just there treading water, passing time, watching this, watching that, everything is of equal value. And what concerns me about what you're saying is that we no longer have the time to be bored, and the time, therefore, to generate our own questions and to go on a journey. And if you don't go on a journey, you're not thinking, in my view.
And I think this context part of it is just such a critical parameter, and the whiskey is a really great example. You know, how many in the household? What other additional circumstances? Is somebody potentially dropping that off to a neighbour? I mean, there are so many different. Or are they drinking it? And it's interesting that I sat down with a grocery retailer about 2 years ago. In Australia, we have a goods and service tax, which is like a VAT, and it's added on, and it increases on different types of food. So the fresher the food, generally the lower the tax, and the more processed a food, or if it's considered to be, like a luxury item, it might be wine or it might be chocolate or something like that, or sugar content, the tax tends to go up. And they came up with this great idea that they would model a fat tax. They would look at the grocery basket, and they will look at the amount of VAT that you were paying on things, and they would model out the likelihood of your size. And therefore, once they knew your size, whether or not they could then sell that information for insurance purposes, or what else could they do. And it was very, very interesting. They were modeling this all out, and at the time they were partnering with Google, and they were getting all this information. And then someone said, well, we have a lot of pregnant women. They noticed that there was a particular item that was being eaten. I can't remember what it was. It was, I don't know, licorice and ice cream or some silly thing. And then they worked out that in this particular suburb that they were doing the modelling, they had a lot of young expectant women, and that this grocery basket was like this for a period of time, and then it just stopped. This pattern just stopped. And data is just data. It's this context, it's getting to this context and understanding that is, or the question that is so critical to actually understand what are we asking and what is the context of why we're asking it before you run off and develop a product or service based on the data without actually understanding the context.
Yeah, in a way, it's a little bit like I was saying, but on a different level with the brain, in that it's all very well to have facts, data, but when you relate it to other things, then it has a meaning that it doesn't have in isolation. Yeah. So this even happens at the individual level of processing, the way your brain is working, as it does in the marketplace. That's quite nice. The context is so important.
This data you wish to know about your customers brings us to GDPR again. And my question, Simon, is if this could actually become an engine to establish Europe as a safe data harbor worldwide. Is this a first step?
I think definitely the GDPR will be the gold standard globally, and will also mean a competitive advantage for European companies. Because, of course, all this question of processing of personal information, there are clear principles enshrined which would limit people doing so. Purpose limitation, then also encryption and anonymization where necessary. So I think, yes, it's a means which will be also scaled up globally, as we saw by reference to the Californian example. So I believe this is a good first step into making the whole data economy a bit more human-centric again, and providing for some basic safeguards companies must guarantee, and also provide for the fines to sanction companies who do not obey the law.
But what needs to be done to make data protection an EU export product, or can this be an export product of the European Union?
What has to be done, first of all, properly implemented by companies, and secondly, sanctioned if not properly implemented. And since Europe is one of the biggest markets
I don't
globally,
mean GDPR especially, but data protection as a whole, so that this could be a product. It's not a product, but this could be something to being exported from the European Union.
Well, I think as you made first the phrase convenience versus privacy, I think privacy can be a convenience, and that's where this is our opportunity. If we make privacy conform and data protection conform products, services, clouds, analytic models, then we have an advantage, because of course users, citizens, consumers in other countries would also like that their personal information is processed according to a certain set of minimum requirements, and that their privacy is respected. So I think, yes, this is the big potential of the GDPR, if we do it properly and we don't cook it down, as you said, because this is the risk now, that again in the implementation period lobbying by big US providers will soften the provisions enshrined in the GDPR. And I think what also must follow is strict fines. So I mean, Facebook is one of the obvious candidates being in the media regularly for breaches. There must be a substantial fine as a signal. Of course, there is some, let's say, transition time now, but I think we will be seeing this in the next 1 to 2 years. Once also the DPAs know what exactly how they enforce and what the GDPR means, then we will start seeing heavy fines. We already had the first fine. I think in the UK we just read about it. But I mean, we're speaking of 500,000 euros for companies such as Facebook, which does not really, it's a drop in the ocean. But if this increases and we guarantee proper implementation, and also you as working with a cloud service provider, you work every day on implementation by design, then I think this will drastically change also on a global scale.
I think all of that is true, but I think one of the things I loved about your slide was the idea of giving to the customer. And so the single digital market, or the promise of this cross-border cooperation it's really critical. We have to find new commercial models. Technology is not going to go away. Uber today, flying helicopter tomorrow, my grocery basket delivered at my door before I've even thought about how much whiskey I need, Campari for me. There are these things that will be part of everyday life, but can't be at the cost of our agency. And therefore, the most critical thing is we've got to find these new commercial models. And from a cloud point of view, a processing point of view, a technology point of view, I think this is such an exciting time to be working in technology, because how do we take what's been centralized and efficient and move it out to the edge, join people up to it, add a layer of new value creation, and make that work for tens of millions of people? That's a pretty exciting challenge to turn up to every day. And so that, I think, is the opportunity. And regulation is a good stick, but we actually need carrots as well. We need product innovation that creates this new layer of value.
Just a very quick question for Simon, I think, probably. Because I'm just a passing thought. When you're saying, yes, £500,000, and it was pounds, is trivial. What about reputational issue? It may be the money itself is minor, but if that happens, are the consumer going to be still as enthusiastic about Facebook or whoever if they see them being held to account and have their feet in the fire in this way, even if it's just small amounts of money? Surely, in the end, these companies stand or fall by their reputation, and once you get a bad reputation, you're not going to have people buying into you so much. Or is that not an
I would
issue?
say the harm to reputation has only its impact if there's competition. Yeah. And in the case of Facebook, there is no competition. So anyone who would say, well, I don't trust them, but where else shall I go? Yeah. So this is the first question. But sorry, just getting back to your point and also to your presentation, I think you also made this point of trading personal information for value. And there I must disappoint you, because according to European data protection law, this is not allowed. Because if you want your data deleted once, or you want it back, but you traded it for a service, how can this be possible?
And I'd love to answer that. And I think this idea, we think of trading it for value as we're so used to this brokering model. But value could be, I need a parcel delivered in the next I thought it would be okay to have it delivered tomorrow, and of course you need my address to deliver it, but something about my circumstances has changed, and I now want this delivered in the next 4 hours to a different place, and I'm going to need to give you information or participate in some way to make that a better exchange. And I think we've got so used to the data broking model that we're not looking at value in terms of loyalty, convenience, participation, reward, and yes, there can be, there's some work that we were doing with a bank recently around digital onboarding. And one of the things they said was we're looking at how much they could save by the customer participating in the onboarding with a combination of consent, that they could actually afford to put the total amount of fees for the year in the account when the account was opened, so the account was in a positive balance rather than negative balance. But it wasn't about buying or purchasing the data. It was about the efficiency of that digital value chain. And I'm with you. I think if we encourage each of us in the room to start amassing data into our own little single honeypot and selling it without understanding that, we've just created data broking 2.0. I don't think that's the solution, and the GDPR understood that. But I don't think we've understood value either, because value can be convenience. Value could be, I get a text message to say I'm about to have a heart attack, or I don't have to order that whiskey, it automatically turns up. Or, there are many different forms of value, and I think that's an important conversation we need to be having.
Of course, but I'm just siding and being maybe here the lawyer, the
Yes.
data protection lawyer, but it was established by DPAs that you cannot trade your fundamental rights for service.
And now I think that's very good, because I think there are, particularly in the US at the moment, and particularly in the blockchain space, there was a company called Wallet that raised $50 million in a matter of a couple of weeks. A couple of young guys together with one of the professors at Stanford advocating, and it's one of those, back up your social data, we will anonymize it, we all know how hard that is, and then trade that. And I think we will actually, at some of the tension we'll see those solutions happening in the US in contrast, which comes back to your question. We have to be proving these models in Europe, because those alternatives will be hot on the tail of what's going on.
Because you mentioned Facebook several times now in these answers, I would like to know just a small question, because this is very seldom. I read you're not on Facebook, and I would like, what was your personal decision? Yes, what was your personal decision to do that? Because you deal a lot with these topics. What was your decision beside that what you mentioned in your speech?
I couldn't see the point of it.
Yeah,
I couldn't see the point. So basically, I don't want to advertise my personal life to a whole range of people. I have one-on-one relationships, as I'm sure one all, and each relationship is a bespoke relationship, and that is curated by seeing the person, or by phoning them, or possibly by an email. But I don't really feel the need to have an audience. I don't feel the need. I can come here. I don't feel the need. And what's very interesting is most of the people I work with are in their 20s and early 30s, yeah? And of course they live on Facebook. And it just fascinates me how they see themselves as a brand. So the most mundane thing, you'll take a photo of yourself doing it all the time. They're always taking photos and selfies and putting them online and commenting for the most boring things, and they don't seem to realize, again, how they're sharing that with people that perhaps they wouldn't choose to share it with. But this notion that they're deriving a notion of identity from the feedback of others, the approval of others, and so there's this problem. On the one hand, you want approval and conformity from others. On the other hand, you want to be the celebrity, the special one. And so there's this kind of irreconcilable paradox, that you want to be different, but you want to conform. You want approval, but at the same time, you want to, so I see them having this issue and spending a lot of time doing it. And I have better things to do with my life. I play squash, I go shopping, I see my mates, I enjoy not whiskey, but wine. Yeah. So why don't, instead of all this, looking at how many friends you've got? It's rather sad, I think. Yeah.
Let's come back to the single digital market once more, and last time, because of the fact that Austria has the EU presidency at the moment. Simon, can you tell us what could happen in the next year on the way to this single digital market?
Well, Austria has set some priorities for its presidency. Cybersecurity is one of it, so I think they are putting a strong emphasis on cybersecurity and advancing and progressing in the negotiations on the Cybersecurity Act, but also on the implementation of the NIST, and also the multi-annual framework, so the financing of the next Commission funding, as I outlined briefly, specifically to the digital field. So, but what would change? Austria does not only have the presidency of the Council, but also the presidency of the European Data Protection Board. So they're also being the first one who are leading and organizing the work. So I think what Austria can gain from it is, of course, demonstrate, pioneer, do it better. What they can gather is, of course, some expertise and really drive processes in the desired direction.
Do you think the EID is a key to this digital single market, or even the way to this single market? Helmut Fahlmann, I think, wrote this in his book, that this is a key question on the way there?
I think looking at the digital single market, and I don't know if my presentation outlined it good, but you have to imagine it as a puzzle board. You know, you have some basic puzzle pieces which must be there, such as GDPR and security-related regulation. But then you have little bits and pieces. I think the ADAS you are referring to is an important piece now also in view of this whole public e-government strategy, because this will also allow at a later stage of time that you have the one-stop principle in Europe. This means you can type in your personal information or your relevant information for any public administrative aspects, and then you have to do it only once, and then wherever you are in Europe, you can use e-government services. That's a bit the vision. And there the ADAS is an important puzzle piece which will allow this, but this is only a public application of it. Of course, it could also find its application in the private sector to some extent.
This is not this EID, as we could talk about, an identification in the internet that really says, that's me. This is not this. What is the acceptance of such a discussion or such a vehicle in other European countries at the moment?
Well, I mean, you have some forerunners which even allow for or provide for digital citizenship to its countries, such countries like Estonia.
I'm an Estonian digital citizen.
Yes, you're a digital citizen. I'm not yet, but I think, of course, why not? But this is also, I'm not very familiar with this concept of electronic or digital ID, but I think, of course, as long as it's in line with privacy and the data protection rules, as long as it's also used for specific purposes and not abused, I think this is a very, let's say, fashionable concept.
I think the abuse thing, and I know that we need days or weeks to have this discussion, because I think there's a race to the digital moon right now between Europe and Asia and the United States. And the approach at the identity level is very, very different. The Europeans have a sense of the rights of the citizen and therefore the right to your persona, your identity. US have done a very great job of identifying you and then creating a commercial model. And we have the Asian model where there is this right to track for the good of the collective. And I think if there is one thing at an architectural level that we really need to have the conversations with is, yes, we need the EIDAS systems, we need the cross-border, we need the single, the one-time collection of data. But we also need to think really carefully about what does that mean if that's then used in school, in a grocery store, at a bank, because the way that that is architected is also going to determine where the single digital market goes. Because once I know who you are, and that you like whiskey, and this, and I can join those things contextually without any of us understanding that, then we've created the same problems that the GDPR was intended to head off at the pass. And I think the identity piece is a really critical part of that jigsaw puzzle. Yeah. Really critical.
Who should create this identity? That's a big question, because should this be regulated by states? Because sooner or later, Facebook has enough data for that to create such a EID, or Spar maybe, if you know everything about your customers, then you can create this.
Yeah, I think this comes down to the question you asked me a while back. which is finally who decides, and who makes decisions, and who says this is beneficial or this is being abused. Where is that laid down or decided or agreed? And I think part of the problem now with living in the digital, completely joined up world that we live in is who's making the decisions and who would we want to make the decisions? And if we don't have a single fat controller, as it is, then how do we get to that point? And I think that's a non-trivial question.
I need to help you on this one.
Yeah.
Yes.
He said that he would join if we hit a red line.
I think he's just detangling confusions because
It's just about confusions. When we are saying that we want to digitize processes, we want to do everything digital, we want to do contracts in a digital way so that they are legally official documents, then only currently in Austrian law, you can only sign a document in two ways. Either with your pen in the physical world or with an EIDAS-based system with the state ID, with the digital signature, and there's a European digital signature law, and then this has the same level of binding signature as your physical signature. And that's the important point. So it's not the question if Spar can do it. This is something they can build let's say a digital self in the world, and it looks as if it were you, but it's not legally binding. What you need is for contracts is a legally binding signature, and therefore EIDAS is necessary. And the problem with this regulation currently is that there are member states who are far ahead in using the EID for everything, for buying a bus ticket and going on a bus ride like Estonia does. And there are member states like Austria who were far ahead 15 years ago and really got stuck to the idea that this is just for the public sector and for no one else. And they didn't like the banks use it, etc. In reality, you would need to sign up for your e-banking with your EID and do electronic banking with this to have it legally binding, to be able to sign up a bank account. And that's the discussions that we are currently having in Brussels. And Austria needs to get EIDAS compliant, which we are currently not. So we are currently behind and not in front. And that's the important thing. And we have to do it. And in that sense, I believe that it is, and that's where we're not in total agreement, that this kind of EID is the fundamental of going digital. Because if I can't do a contract digitally, if I can't sign it, I don't have a fundament for doing business.
Nowadays, you can, in some cases, use your Facebook ID. It is something like that. But it's not, I know. It's not legally binding. That's the difference. Not in the public sector, but in some private contractions, you can use this.
I think
No, you can't.
to sign up.
I need to use some Austrian terms because I don't know the English ones. For example, if you do, Rebecca needs to help me. I think it's the Ausbildungskostenrückersatzvereinbarung.
Okay.
someone definitely needs to explain that.
I can explain. If you send an employee,
Cashback for trainings for employees.
if you send an employee to a conference,
Yes?
the employee needs to sign a document that if he leaves the company, that he pays back at least partially that education, because you did educate him for him to stay in the company, not to leave the company. So, and the point is, this is only valid with a signature, either physically or EID based. You can't sign it in a Facebook or Spar defined way. It's simply, it wouldn't be legal, it wouldn't be binding, and it wouldn't help.
If I can jump in on the Facebook identity thing. I was at an identity conference in Germany a few months ago, and there were 9 people from Facebook's identity team in Palo Alto. 9 people at a conference of 200 or 300 people. That's a high percentage of representation. Most of them young engineers, smart, new to Facebook. And I sat down with one of the engineers, and she was explaining to me how they had no revenue targets and how they had no expectations on them for the quarter, that their role was just to work out how they could enable everything on the planet to be done with a Facebook identity, whereby you would not need to worry about any of these other things.
And what about if you weren't on Facebook?
Well, I'm not on Facebook either.
So what would happen to you?
But this is also some naivety, but I think there is also another very important issue here, and that is that there will be Facebook, there will be Google, there will be many of these services that will come into tension around these things, and we need to find the way to have this balance to make sure that doesn't happen. It's very, very important.
Just one sentence on Facebook, because I think it's a lot more dangerous than we all believe, because our politicians do have a conflict of interest. They're using Facebook so that we vote for them. Yeah? So if you want to find a politician who is going to punish Facebook, you could have a hard time. Yeah? So we need to solve the conflict of interest between, I would say in general, politics and the media.
Yeah.
And if the media is not independent of politics, you're not living in democracy anymore.
So, yes, Susan.
Yeah, so in my experience of the media, their priority is not necessarily, and I'm sure you're the exception, is not necessarily the truth as the first priority. It's to sell the papers, it's to get the audience figures, it's to get the ratings. And so therefore, it's how sensational a story can be, how exciting and so on, rather than how truthful or how... so I think having them as the custodians of society is probably a bit dangerous, yeah? Which comes down to, if we've now said we're not going to have the politicians, right? We're not going to have them. We're not going to have the media, right? We're not going to have Facebook itself. Who's left? Who's left who can do this? So I think this, back to the original question I posed, which is it has to be us. It has to be us that drive it, because the media will give us the stories that they think are going to sell and that we're going to want. So the politicians are going to stay in power if they give us what they think we want. So we have to set it clear to everyone what we want. We have to make it clear.
I think it comes back to that quote that Jaron Lanier said, is that what stands between where we are today and where we may want to be is how involved we want to be in solving this. And I think even for journalists, I have some friends that are journalists, and they say it's really tough. If you want to do investigative journalism, or if you want to write something that may take time to fact check and really get across, everything is so fast, everything is so immediate, and everything is, in this news cycle of 30 seconds. And so part of it does come down to each of us and saying, do we want to understand things more? Do we want to wrestle with difficult things? Do we want to wrestle with the technical challenges?
But let's come back to the EID.
Very quickly, to societal responsibility. My vintage, my generation, I think were more aware of things. We discussed general politics, but now I think the digital world has allowed people to live in their own echo chambers, in their own little bubbles, in their own little worlds, so that this notion of a societal responsibility and a collective responsibility, and trying to think of how, for the best, one can set standards and do things, I think that's probably endangered in a way it wasn't several decades ago.
I would like to come back to the EID, and there is the idea of chipping people. The suggestion of Helmut Fallmann is to implant one here between the thumb and the forefinger, as I read. And I would like to ask you, what do you think about this idea? Should we chip people for creating an EID?
I would really enjoy that. So I said it before. No, I think I do not know how many times I use my fingerprint or some passwords or some cards to do it. It would be really convenient to do it in that way. So if all the processes can really support that, so I can pay with that, I can identify myself. So I think I wouldn't have any problems with that, really. I think for the convenience it's great. And it's clear, so there's no discussion if this is me or not.
Okay, so I think we're going anyway. Everyone says that we're now into mobile technologies rather than the old desk-bound technologies. And the mobiles are getting smaller, and they're becoming more and more part of our bodies as they are, and that we hold them close to us. We get irritated if someone else holds it. You must look at it all the time. So it's only a very small step from having something you're holding up to your face as something that's invasive and implanted within you, doing exactly what the mobile does, and the technology is relatively trivial to do that. So I think this is part of towards the cyber person, or how one would see oneself as becoming a cyber person. The problem lies when people have expectations about what that will make them and exactly what it can achieve. But I think the actual technologies then will happen within the next few years even. I wrote a novel about this called 2121, but that was the date when I saw all this dystopia. But I think it's going to be even earlier.
Maybe I would ask, okay, what is the purpose of this chip? I find this a quite invasive means, because why can you not wear it on the body? Why must it be in the body?
Well, you can shower. At least you can
and
shower.
take it off.
No, you can shower all the time. You can take selfies of yourself.
And then, of course,
the
the question would be also, is on this chip only an identifier, or is it a transmitter or a sensor? So I think there you really must distinguish, because depending on what's on the chip or what the chip can do, the scenarios and the context changes drastically.
Yeah. Of course.
It will do everything. You have to think the worst case scenario.
Of course, these are the main questions, but I think that's why you're here.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm here because I want to distinguish these two ideas. Both are valid. It's on the one hand the idea of having active technology in your body and really being some kind of cyborg. And my idea about 2 years ago was to just have a passive chip. So just make sure that you and your digital self, your digital identity, have a one-on-one relationship by using a passive chip that can be read, let's say, within 20 centimeters of distance, but you won't be tracked, etc. It's just a way of mapping you to your digital identity.
But it will be abused. How are you going to police it so that it's not made into an active chip? How can you police that?
By certification.
By him, he's going to say that.
Dave Birch, I'm not sure if it's in his latest book, but one of the things that he always says around this idea of a single identity is that we also have to think of what happens if you want to be a whistleblower, what happens if you go into witness protection, what happens if you need to reinvent yourself for some reason, what happens if you want to access legal content but is not something that you may want either someone else in the household to know. So I think that this problem between, my physical self is not always my identity, and my identity is not always my physical self.
Well, that begs the question, what is your identity? And what is identity? Which is another 5 hours of discussion.
Okay, but we are running out of time. Sorry, Susan, we are running out of time, so I have to make a break here. We have a lot of aspects.
We're going to pitch tents, and we're all going to stay in this room until we solve digital identity.
There is something I want to talk about. I want to talk about at the end of this discussion, and this is AI. And you, Andreas, told us about using this in your company. So I want to refer to this question. So 1 hour ago, I asked you, how do you use it? In what connection do you use it? And then I would like to talk about this.
I really love this discussion this afternoon about brain and technology. And I want to ask you, is anybody in the room who wants to work in hard logistics or as a shop assistant at Spa? Okay. We are talking about 80,000 people working in this company, only at Spa. And I would say 70,000 of these people are working in logistics and as shop assistants and in administration. Why you don't want to work there? Because your brain is a little bit different, like the people who are working in these areas. Now I'm coming to a very dangerous. No, this was not because of that. This is the development in our society of the people, and we are using now artificial intelligence or machine learning not to play Go or chess. So what we are doing is really to support these people. So giving a kind of external brain and speeding up processes, and we're speeding up decisions. So, for example.
And is this, if I can interrupt you, is this artificial intelligence if you speed up a process?
No, we are speeding up processes because we were doing these processes with artificial intelligence instead of people. Because people need a long time of decision for the decisions, and more they are not able to do these decisions because their brain has not this capacity saying it in that way. Imagine in an Interspa store there are 200 people, 200 employees. Most of them are part-time workers. So in the past, very clever shop managers could really do a working plan for that, and they expect how many customers will come into the store, how many checkouts I need, and everything that. So they were really entrepreneur. They are thinking for business. But more and more, we do not have these people who are able to do that, to manage that, to have really this sensitivity to understand that. And we see that machine learning tools
patterns help.
They can do much more better this stuff planning than the people. On the other side, we see a lot of the data we need in our company. All this master data comes from people. People are entering the data. They are making mistakes. We are now using artificial intelligence for bringing much more quality into the master data. For example, finding out that the year for wine of 2025 cannot be valid, but the people are not able to detect that. So we are pumping the data in this machine learning tools, and the machine learns how master data in the specific assortments has to look like.
I read that we often call AI that what we do not understand. If we do not understand how this works, we call it artificial intelligence. I know that you don't do this. But I read about the programmer of this Go program, Go Play program, that after winning that game by the computer, he said he don't know why. So isn't it a high risk if we leave the decision not in your company, but decision medical decisions or decisions about punishment and whatever, to such programs from that we do not exactly know why they decide in this way.
Yeah. Well, okay, so I'm sure everyone's familiar here with the notion of cognitive computing, such as IBM's Watson, I'm sure. And I think that on the one hand, yes, it can do certain things, but as always in life, you have to ask what do you want to achieve. And if you want to achieve the kind of information and the kind of processes that you're describing, yes, that's fine. If you want someone to make an ethical decision, no, it's not fine. Yeah. Also, if you want someone to deeply understand, not fine. There's this lovely thing from a long time ago of translating a proverb. Yeah? You know the thing from the Bible, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. That came out, the vodka is good, but the steak is lousy. Because they were taking it very literally. Yeah? So, I thought it was very good. So this notion of metaphor, right? So as Einstein said, it's the difference between information and knowledge. If you want, I think the problem lies that AI is inappropriately named. It's not intelligence. Yeah? Depends how you define intelligence. I would define it as the ability to see one thing in terms of something else, to be able, which, of course, as I've just illustrated with that metaphor, they cannot do. So yes, it's artificial, but call it artificial cleverness or artificial, but calling it intelligence, I think that's what confuses people, because they read into it more than it can deliver. It will never deliver ethics. It will never deliver deep understanding or creativity. It will deliver speeding up simple services. It will deliver succeeding in Go, but it will never understand things. So it's a bit like render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to the human brain the things that are the human brain. Then we'll all get on very well, rather than one trying to be the other. Yes? Yeah.
Maybe to also now having in memory your slides where you showed the development of the synapses in the brain.
Yeah.
I think, and this is also based on a book I read, Super Intelligence, that maybe now we are, when it comes to AI, at this first 3 month stage. What happens in 30 years? First of all, this, and second, I would just add on, I think here the contextual element is very important, and on the application. So for what do you use AI? You must decide as a society for which purpose you use it, what human intervention is there, or where is the human in this decision chain, which data do you feed AI, what do the algorithms do, how they're checked, certified in some cases, on what their output is.
Sure. I think there's a lot of fear that you've just articulated that's groundless, actually. There's someone called Ray Kurzweil, who some of you may have heard of, who talks about the singularity, who predicts that any day now that we're going to have AI keeping us as sort of household pets and we'll be just sort of inferior beings. That's really a misapprehension. And what's very interesting is all these people that wave the flag for this new world, this new AI world and taking over, whether it's bad or good, all of them are physicists or businessmen. None of them are neuroscientists. Not one biologist says this, yeah? They're all men. That's an aside. I just don't know what that means. But there's 10 of them. But none of them are neuroscientists, because no proper neuroscientist would even think that this is going to be likely, because you're dealing with such completely different systems and one cannot model the other. So, I think a lot of the fears of robots taking over are founded on people that don't really understand the neuroscience, without sounding nasty. That doesn't mean to say we can't harness that AI to serve us as we wish it to be served.
Or the efficiency of decision-making, the speed, I think.
I think a final statement to that. I think that's the problem that we are talking about. We are talking about all this danger stuff which is coming up. I want to say that in a very simple area, you can use this technology. Yeah. And this is really a value for the business and works. And that's what I want to say, that this is not science for the future. This is in place. Yeah. And day by day, we are improving that.
Exactly. Yeah.
And this is a good final statement. Thank you very much, because this clock shows us we are 10 minutes over our time. An dieser Stelle darf ich mich auf Deutsch noch einmal den Wünschen, die die Referenten Ihnen zum 30. Jubiläum des Unternehmens dargebracht haben, anschließen. Weiterhin viel Erfolg, alles Gute, auch bei den Entscheidungen, die Sie jetzt zu treffen haben für neue Arbeitsfelder, die Sie sich aufmachen. Für heute natürlich noch einen angenehmen und feierlichen Nachmittag und Abend. Auf Wiedersehen.